All right, here we go. Welcome, everybody. This is Revenue Roadmap, where we talk about driving revenue and increasing profits in local businesses. So today, I am with Mr. Matt Hacker. I'm Anthony Karls, president here at Rocket Clicks. Matt, thanks for being here with us today. We're going to talk a little bit more about leadership. Giant
Absolutely.
program. Started walking through all of this. So today, we're going to talk in a little more detail about our voices that we talked about last time in the Giant program. What does that mean? Sounds fun. I got a voice. You got a voice.
We all have voices.
Maybe we should sing together. Actually, that would be a good bet for me in with you because you're a good singer. So you can make up for my. I'll sing.
Don't be so hard on yourself.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Before we jump into that, I have a question for you, sir.
All right.
New question for you. All right. Someone had just 30 minutes a day to invest in personal development. What would you say they should focus on?
30 minutes a day to invest in personal development.
Yep. Any type of personal development, be it career or relationships in their life.
Yeah.
Or it's you're developing yourself as a human.
Yeah. So I think that there's three different areas of leadership that I like to focus on, and that type of development. For me, it's my spiritual development. So I'll put emphasis and I'll put time into that every single day.
Yeah.
It's my relational development. So that's within my family. So like, what can I do today to make myself a better person tomorrow for my family? And then there's my professional development that I do for work. And I listen to various different podcasts. Obviously, listen to this podcast, but there's a slew of other leadership podcasts that are really, really good, that I tend to listen to on the regular. And
What's your favorite?
I really love The Mindset Mentor.
Okay.
By Rob Dial Jr. There's tons of content on there. The podcasts, they're short, so you can get through a lot of them. Pro tip, put it on 1.25 or 1.5 speed and you can listen a lot faster. But he does a really good job of tying leadership into real life things that you might be going through. So that's probably the number one leadership podcast on my playlist for sure. And then, like I said, what can I do for my family today to be a better person for them tomorrow? And then I get myself right spiritually every day.
Awesome. I love that. Very, very good. All right. So we're going to talk more about our Giant program here. So last time we talked, we're kind of going through this first workshop that we do with our team.
Yep.
Called Transforming Team Communication. First big module here is called Discovering Your Leadership Voice. We talked about that a little bit. So we're going to dive a little bit into the 5 voices concept here.
Yep.
Talk about that. So like before we jump into that, like let's go back to the why. Why is this something that matters?
This matters for our business, and this matters for every business out there because of one simple fact. And I can say that everybody in your company speaks, but not everybody in your company is heard.
Yeah.
So everybody speaks, but not everybody is heard, because you and I might be louder than somebody else at our company. And usually the people who speak the loudest are the ones that are heard the most often. But that doesn't mean that everybody else doesn't still speak.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that what they have to say isn't important.
So why does that matter? Let's talk a little bit about that. So that's a big one.
Yeah.
So not everyone speaks, not everyone's heard. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds interesting. Why does that matter?
Why does that matter? Because 82, so there's studies have been shown that 82% of team members on your team typically feel misunderstood and undervalued. 82%. That's a very large percentage of people. Okay. Put that on top of the fact that teams generally function at less than 60% of what their true potential actually is. So not only do you have a majority of your team that feels misunderstood and undervalued, but also over half of your team isn't actually working up to what their true potential is.
Yeah, I think that's from a like more recent Gallup poll in terms of engagement versus disengagement and
Yeah,
actively being disengaged. So like those are it's a lot. That's a lot of expense to be carrying on a week
it's a
to
lot of
month to
expense.
month for a small business when you got some people that aren't actively engaged and they're not.
And 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 what I would say is like imagine having perfect numbers for these is never going to be a thing,
Yeah,
right? But just imagine what if those numbers were cut in half? What if only 41% of your team was misunderstood and undervalued, and then 30% wasn't living up to their true potential? That would be a game changer for business in and of itself.
yeah, and it's still not even excellent.
Right. That's still not great.
Yeah.
That's still like a C minus.
So how do we wrap our heads around this? Because I think this is an important topic. This when I first got introduced to this, I thought it was very fascinating. I'm like, okay, well that's some tough information. What do I do with it? How do I change? And five voices concept, like as I got into it and understood it, that really helped me grasp what it meant and helped me really understand how people come to the table with different perspectives that are very, very important to them in mind, and how I bring things to the table that are very different from my perspective in terms of how I experience the world that are different from theirs, and hence opportunity for conflict. So let's
Absolutely.
talk about it. So what are the five voices? What does that mean?
So five voices. Okay. Uh, I'm going to go through these. So I was talking earlier about the loudness of a voice,
Yeah,
right? Like when certain people speak, everybody hears it, and when some people speak, nobody hears it because they're a little more shy.
yeah,
They might not be as outgoing with people, and that's just part of their voice, and that's okay. That's just part of who they are.
yeah. That's
But
their natural.
understanding that is important. So from the quietest voices to the loudest voices, I'm going to go in order. There's five. Okay. So your quietest voice is your nurturer. Okay. Nurturer, and we're gonna do a whole series about each one of these, go into each one of these voices. So excuse me, I'm not going to go into each one of them in high detail today, but nurturer is your quietest voice. Guess what the percentage of people is in this world that have a nurturer voice? 43%. 43% of the general population is a nurturer voice. That means 43% of the people that are speaking probably aren't being heard because they're not really speaking very loudly.
Yeah,
Um, so nurturer, number one. Creative, creative is, and I should say also, the nurturer voice is very like present oriented, and they're very like relational based. Like they're all about nurturing relationships, and they're very relational based, right? So between the five voices, you can either be future oriented or present oriented, and you could either be more so on the side of uh, uh, relational, like a relationship based voice, or based on logic.
yeah. And these are
So
these aren't like boxes that we're sticking in a
right,
box and like this is who
right.
you are. But these
You
are
are
more.
this, and you are this, and you are this.
Yeah, these are
No,
more. These
these
are
are
more
all just
natural.
speak to our tendencies.
Yeah, exactly. Cool.
It all speaks to our tendencies.
Yeah,
So we have a tendency to be more present oriented if you're a nurturer. You have a tendency to be more relationally focused if you are a nurturer.
yeah,
So that's what I'm speaking to. So first, nurture. Second is creative. Now, creative is a little bit different because you could actually be a creative is a future oriented voice. Okay, generally people who are creative think in the future, but depending on what your your second voice is, you could either be a relational based creative, or you could be a logic based creative. So there's some intricacies depending on what your second voice is that kind of talk about where you typically go from that standpoint. 9% of the general population is a creative.
yeah. There's a so in the something interesting between the nurture and the creatives because they're both from a volume perspective low, but for different reasons. Nurturers will likely say less because they're trying to maintain relational harmony. Creatives won't speak less. They won't be understood more because they're a more creative oriented voice,
Yep.
and typically they're misunderstood. It's not that they won't say something, it's when they speak no one gets it. And
Yep.
that it's extraordinarily frustrating, and then they pull back. Why doesn't anybody understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
So it's a different how it sounds is different in terms of literal volume, but in terms of influential volume, it's low on the spectrum because when they speak, they're not understood. Versus nurturers will likely speak less because they don't want to disrupt the relational harmony in a group.
That's a great point. That's a great point. They're quieter voices, but for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
You nailed that.
Cool. So creative. Then we got what do we got next?
Then middle of the pack, third coming up is the Guardian. So Guardian is a very present-oriented voice that is all about logic. They are the question askers of the group. So if you have somebody that asks you a question about a question about a question, then follows it up with a sub-question, good chance they might be a Guardian. Guardians make up 30% of the general population. So that's our third one. Fourth one is connector. That's what I am. I am a connector. I make up, and people like me, make up 11% of the population, and we are future-oriented thinkers that are also relational based. So we are all about the people. I think I brought this up the last time. Connectors are kind of like, hey, if you need something done, find a connector because they know somebody that knows somebody that's going to be able to help you out.
Yeah.
We're all about relational harmony and kind of in working within teams and communicating and guiding people through that. And then last but certainly not least, the loudest voice of the five is the pioneer. The pioneer makes up 7% of the population. So they are the lowest percentage of all of the population is that voice, is the pioneer. They are very future-oriented thinkers, and they are solely based on logic and reasoning when it comes to why they think the way they think, why they act the way they act. It's because they're all about logic based.
Yeah. So big, lot of concepts here, but when you have an issue in an organization and you bring people together, if you put all five of these voices around the table, which would be the ideal situation,
yep.
Because you're probably going to come, and it's ideal if everybody actually is going to have the opportunity to be heard, because you're likely to come out with a really good solution once you are aware of this. If you're not, what likely will happen is an immature pioneer will run over the group because they're loudest, and they're going to be very future oriented. They're very logic. They're great thinkers. They are going to discount most of the relational aspects of their decision. They're going to care a lot less about the details of how we get there. To a lot of pioneers, I know for myself, as a creative pioneer, it's like a 3-step process: step 1, step 2, step 3. And then I talk with, JP, our resident guardian on our leadership team.
Yep.
And he's like, what about this? 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 And I'm like, oh, there's actually 30 steps here. There's a lot more that I didn't consider. And, it's more about typically the what is correct, but the how is wrong. So you need a lot of these other voices to fill in the gaps. Because when you do go to just move forward, you're going to run into problems because you didn't consider all of the other things that need to be considered, or answer questions that questions nurturers are going to have is what's going to happen with X, Y, and Z person when we do this change. How is that going to impact them? Are we considering that? Well, all of those things, and they're important, because if 43% of your team doesn't feel like you're on board for them and you're for them, you're likely going to have a really hard time with change management.
Absolutely. And one of the things too you'd said, like putting everybody together in a room. One of the things I think about that I've learned through this, that you'll learn going through Giant, is, understanding what a person's voice is can really shine light on potentially like some of the reasons or the ways, or the whys, I should say, on how they show up in a meeting.
Yeah.
So you might have Bill, who's in your meeting, and he never speaks up, or he never talks. Well, Bill might be a nurturer, and by default, like nurturers, they're never the first ones that are like, I'll go first, right? Because you know why? Because all the connectors in the room, they're the ones that typically are the ones that's like, yeah, I'll voice my opinion. Let's go. Let's do this. So throughout this process, like me as a connector, I have to really sit back in a meeting, and I've had to learn how to let other people go first. And if I know that I'm in a meeting with a nurturer and I'm leading that meeting and I'm asking for feedback, I'm going to go to that nurture and I'm going to make them speak first, so that they know that their voice is heard,
Mm-hmm.
and we make sure that we don't leave that meeting without that person's voice being heard for whatever it is that we're talking about. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things, that understanding what the five voices is. That's one of the big ways that it's really helped to open my eyes when I'm in a meeting with people, to help understand why people are the way they are,
Yeah.
which only helps our team work better, which we all know what the downhill effect of that is.
Yeah, I mean, when you're from a change management perspective in a business, and small businesses have to change and pivot all the time.
Yep.
Bringing if you're a pioneer, or you're more of a future oriented voice, bringing in the guardian to ask all of the questions you didn't ask because you didn't ask them all. Like, you might have a great idea, but
Yep.
you got a boat with some holes on the bottom of it. It might be driving fast enough where it won't sink, but it doesn't mean there's not going to be water in it. And then the nurturer is going to care about how wet the people are going to get, because you got a plan with a lot of holes. Bringing
Yep.
those two people in to figure out how we implement this and think through all the right questions and right considerations, it's amazing how that changes the implementation of a change in a business, because you're actually checking all the boxes. And it probably took me, after getting introduced to this concept, 3 years to really get that in my head and like make that part of how I think about change process, because it's extraordinarily difficult, because I see the future. I want to move towards it. I want to move fast. But if I move fast and the team isn't behind me, I essentially am by myself out into the future, and like everybody's like
Yep.
trekking behind me, wondering like, where is he going? I can't keep up. Like, what's happening? So
Yep.
that's not helpful. The business doesn't grow. It doesn't get better. The culture deteriorates. There's a lot of implications. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
awesome. Well, great. So next time we get together, we're going to dive more deeply into we're going to start diving into each of the five voices. We're going to start with nurture. We'll go to creative, we'll cover all five, and then we'll continue our journey. So appreciate it, Matt. Thank you for your
Appreciate
time.
it. Yes, sir. Have a good one.